Did you see Pride the movie? The one where that bright, enthusiastic, handsome young man fought for gay rights in Thatcher's England. He used the common bond of oppression to get the LGBT community to support the 1980s miners and vice versa. He organised, raised money, and even went to their tiny mining village in South Wales, where he faced prejudice on their turf. It was brilliant. It was inspiring. I didn't leave the cinema at the end as I actually wanted to read the credits. I'm a bit of a nerd like that. But I only read the writing at the end of the movie, if I like it. Then it hit me, like a big lump of miner's coal to the face. That young lad, Mark Ashton, was the exact same age as me. Me! Spoiler alert. He actually died in 1987, age 26, of AIDS. I'm still upset about that. Today, young gay kids have the hope of being who they are, and that's great. But I had to survive in the 1980s, hide what you feel instead of loving life. I had to find my off switch, to aim to settle for existing along the edges. I didn't have the knowledge or the courage or the passion that Mark Ashton had back then. I was raised in unholy Catholic Ireland. Beautiful, beautiful Mark Ashton faced daily discrimination in his young life, then got HIV and as was inevitable in the 1980s, he died. I didn't get it. I didn't die, or I'm not ill. But I think that every gay guy of my generation has survivor's guilt. We were survivors of two things. One, we were born criminal. And secondly, because we knew nothing about sex, many of us were destined to get HIV and AIDS. I knew so little about it, probably because Catholic values saw the sin in condoms rather than death by the deprivation of protection. That and the sexual ignorance that were the cornerstones of a Catholic education system endangered us all and killed so many. Why don't gay guys like sport in school? Simple. You were terrified you'd get an erection in the school showers. Years of ridicule for not being a sporty guy, even when you were secretly good at it, were better than getting a hard-on in the school showers. Oh no, that would out you disastrously forever. Avoid, avoid. The media didn't or couldn't give us the information that we needed, what love and sex between men was or could be. Safe sex in the 1980s meant not getting a girl pregnant. Being gay meant you could date girls, but when it came to sex plead, oh no, not until we're married. The nuns had done such a good job on the girls that was actually seen as a good thing. The act of a gentleman. An older friend of mine got his girlfriend pregnant around the time John Paul II came to visit Ireland. And no, I wasn't one of the thousands of teenagers in a stampede to catch a glimpse of the Pope in Dublin or Galway. Later, his father reassured the younger me that, at least he wasn't using contraception. That was his one saving grace. Another 2 local girls got pregnant. Yes, it happened a lot. One kept the baby and raised it to years of neighbours looking at the floor whenever she and her young child would pass in pro-life Ireland. The other girl went to England for the weekend, and she was constantly held up to that first poor, struggling young mother as a fine example of what it meant to keep your knickers on. 3 things could be guaranteed on a 1980s date in Ireland. 1, you could probably have a fumble. Secondly, because there were so few opportunities for intimacy, our equipment usually obliged whenever any opportunity for intimacy arose. And thirdly, you could always feign a row or that good old Irish excuse of being drunk to avoid sex or to fail at it. You could endlessly date in the 1980s because Ireland and the church, oh yeah, apparently there was only one, wanted to control every single urge that you had. You could fake compliance with societal norms while still keeping that dirty little secret of your same-sex attraction. I'm glad Mark Ashton didn't have to put up with any of that crap in England. How did I cope? I'd always wanted kids and a family. I was constantly asked, as my male friends, even those who I'd had clumsy sex with, got married, when are you going to give us our big day out? Those questions turned to disdain as I advanced into my 30s. I'd always play the game of dating girls, nice ones, so they weren't going to accuse me of being gay, but I was certainly going to deny them their big day out. How did I put up with it? Simple. As I grew to realize that I was gay, I learned where to find my off switch, to train myself to never expect a complete life. I switched off to curb my personal ambitions, to deny myself any real relationship, and to occupy myself with things like work. I, like so many other young gay men in the 1980s in Ireland, just switched off, because everything we yearned for was a secret. We usually left home, especially the country boys, and headed for the more anonymous city. You had to watch out for signs in other guys. If he looked at you once, okay. If he looked back, he was curious. Oh, and if he looked at you a third time, well, then you were in. If he had chewed fingernails and lots of stomach acid, signs of inner stress, those were signs too. It was the only gay plague that a Rennie could fix. Oh, and if he was gorgeous and dating a plain-looking girl, well, that was a sign too. Today, gay guys may have gaydar on their phones, but we had it in our heads. In the USA, they use codes like handkerchiefs or earrings worn on the right or left to indicate sexual preference. I never really understood that. It wasn't until one of my girlfriends bought me a pair of leather trousers, now it was the 1980s, that I was hit on by what I later would discover was a leather queen. Sure, I hadn't a clue what he was implying. Gay overtures were made hurriedly in dark places like cars or parks or toilets. There was little time for conversation in case the frustrated cops came along and stopped you, or the wife was expecting him home for dinner. It was purely physical, and you couldn't fall for him. The only certainty was to see who could run away fastest. Those social survival defenses impacted my generation, who, even when liberation came, lacked the social skills that were supported and so well honed in more open and younger people. It took a lot of energy rather than technology to communicate, and communication was a big risk. In those days, you couldn't just expect to stay over at the girlfriend's house after a night out. So a lot of the guys ended up staying over together. And that was your chance. It usually happened very, very late at night. It was purely physical. And one of you left fairly quickly afterwards, or pretended to be asleep, or forgot about it in the morning. Oh, and if he was straight, he had only been frustrated by his earlier female date, and he would never kiss you, no matter what other parts of your body he explored. Straight guys didn't kiss, and you wouldn't expect to hear from him socially for the next day or week or month or ever. If you wanted that one night, you had to be prepared to say goodbye before you'd even kissed hello. Switch off that future bulb. If you could convince yourself that you didn't care, you survived. It was amazing how many good friends I lost after the dirty deed was done. It must have meant something if they wanted to put so much distance between you and themselves and their girlfriends. Oh, and many were quick to get the rumor in that there was something dodgy about you before any questions could be asked of him. Sure, he was gay. I just obliged. The first time that happened to me was with a young married friend. He'd asked me round to his place, and he had a crate of beer and a bottle of whiskey at the ready. I asked where the wife was, and he told me she was overnighting in hospital. I know. Later that night, he took me upstairs to their marital bed, even though there were 3 other bedrooms in the house, and we never stopped till morning. A few weeks later, I was round at his place. We were both going to a party. And his wife said, "Oh, don't attempt to drive home now if you'd had a drink. Just stay over." I pulled him aside and I said, "She knows." So I made sure he got home that night. Sometime later, we were having lunch and he said to me, "Oh, I hate those gays." "Oh, I don't mean you." "You're right," I replied. "You don't mean me. You mean you." It didn't last. He's got 3 kids and he's still with the wife. Wives paid the price in pre-equal Ireland. They were equally exploited by that system of compulsory denial. They usually accepted the proposal, got married, and then discovered that the sex drive wasn't great. She usually stayed for that outwardly respectable lifestyle after he did a job on her self-esteem. I never did that. In fact, if any of my girlfriends in the 1980s asked me if I'd ever slept with a guy, I said yes. It usually led to quite an interesting conversation. But that common line often offered by the girl of, "Oh, it must have been a phase or a drunken one-off," usually saved me from any further interrogation. Usually the guys I liked ran back to the closet anyway, so there wasn't much to tell. I never named any names, but I didn't like the sniggers. So many of the guys I slept with said that I had made a move on them, and I hadn't. They married girls as they had to do, had their lovely kids, and I was to be excluded from our social circle simply because I was single. Very often, my male partner as such was dating the girl sat opposite me. But that was seen as much more acceptable in Ireland, rather than what I knew myself to be. Catholic values and the price of social acceptance. Like every young gay guy then, I anticipated the discrimination and I tolerated it, listening to the homophobic jokes often told by the straight guy that had been wooing me the previous month. I put up with the giggles of married suburbans at parties that I was the floor show at, to alleviate the boredom that set in after the princess had married her prince. She soon found out that she was trapped in a marriage that couldn't be dissolved in the Ireland of the 1980s. Oh, and if he was gay and married, she couldn't get out. But they still had that outwardly respectable tag of being married that deflected all of those awkward questions that I was being asked as to my single status. It wasn't very nice on the girl, unless she got a good guy and felt like she was punching way above her weight. But secretly, she knew, and many wives did. I held on to that off switch and ran at a pace, deflecting bullets of nasty inquiries as to my single status. I switched off to any hope of a partner, a support, a shoulder to cry on, a decent domestic life, a check on my excesses, a holiday partner, a co-parent. I bought a house. All of my married siblings got great presents and cash as marriage coincided with the house setup. I just got all the secondhand stuff because they were saving the real presents for my wedding day. I never got them. How did I cope? Bless that off switch. It saved many a life by teaching us to settle for that minimal standard of existence that our gay birthright ensured. I grew in confidence and anger due to a painful and isolating coming out. And I began to work somewhat like Mark Ashton did, to fight for LGBT rights, to build that better society. At last, I had some gay role models in public. People like David Norris, who did all the heavy lifting by taking those first steps in the 1970s. They were so brave. I was shocked recently to come across an archive cover of a 1970s gay magazine in Ireland. On the front page, there was a picture of a group of about 30 men on a gay outing in Dublin in 1974. Would you do that? They were openly criminal, risking police harassment, risking their jobs, some going through hell just to live. Some of those guys are still around today in their 60s and 70s. And when they go out on the open gay scene, a place unimaginable to them when they were young, they are socially ignored, and treated with all the scorn that a more recent birth cert apparently gives the right to do. Or else they are abused by being criticised for having the audacity to simply exist in the very gay bars that they kept open for years just so that this generation could be free. Sometimes I'm glad that our beautiful young hero, Mark Ashton, didn't live to see that side of the progress he and others fought so hard to achieve. I did. I do. Today, there is a new kind of guilt. Well, something had to replace Catholicism. I am ageing in a most ageist community, where those who fought hardest for freedom are seen as nothing more than dirty old men. Our presence interferes with that endless drug-fueled party lifestyle that is the new gay freedom. Party, the endless party, party like there's no tomorrow. Because despite the fact of freedom's hard won, that is the lot of many a gay boy, past and present. Is that freedom? Or did we simply rebuild the ghettos of criminality just to feel safe again? Today, you can reach your mid-30s and still only know gay life as defined through the straight owners of gay bars, who want nothing more than to maintain that ghetto culture of the last century. We don't have to enter through the side alleys anymore or lock the front door, do we? But entertainment in these places is only defined as guys in frocks. Drinks are overpriced compared to the straight bars next door. And of course, the decibel level excludes any conversation. We can work, we can date, go on holiday together, have family meals. So why do so many gay guys choose to party, get wasted, only socialise when they are drunk or drugged up? And then finally they wake up in their mid-30s and they have no idea who they or their friends are. They are then rejected by the latest generation of twinks who move in a repeated coup to rule the gay scene in their place. Is that what the struggle was all about? Is 30 the new gay death? Then, as now, too many go missing. In my time, why isn't today my time? The innocent went abroad to be initiated or included, to pretend, or to die. It was much easier to hide in a place where no one knew you, and everybody knew everybody in 1980s Ireland. They had put up with so much crap at home that they had to leave their houses, their families, their friends, their college mates, just so they could be themselves. And because we knew nothing about sex, many partied like kids let loose in a toy shop. If that wasn't harsh enough, so many entered that frenzy of the anonymous party lifestyle. And coming from a land where condoms were only given to married couples with a prescription, so many got HIV and AIDS and died. If their families brought home their emaciated bodies, we were told, oh, he died of cancer. AIDS facilitates lethal and opportunistic cancers. So it wasn't a complete lie. But we switched off to that in Ireland too. We exported our young, gay, ill men, just as we did our unwanted babies, both incubated, because contraception was criminalised too. So the struggle to open up our society began then, back then in my youth, not just with the most recent marriage equality campaign, but then, back then. We won 1 point at a time. We conformed just to be listened to. Don't practice homosexuality and it isn't such a sin. I didn't need to practice, actually. I knew how to do it. But did I know or could I allow myself to love when nothing had been won or secured? So, fast forward from then to now, freedom at last. Freedom to hold hands and socialise. Freedom to be more open at school or in work or in families. Freedom to be on the media or in politics. And since May 2015, the freedom to marry. Freedom is great, isn't it? So why does it all seem so irrelevant to me? If I were Mark Ashton, maybe I would have maintained that incredible sense of optimism that saw him through all but one crisis. But I'm not. And apparently, I've survived all of the different crises that life has thrown at me since my youth. I want people to have what I hadn't. I worked for it. I fought for it. I voted for it. The right to be free, to love, to marry, to be accepted in all social circles. But the 2015 vote wasn't enough to turn my off switch on. It had been turned off for far too long. It is covered in Catholic rust. Job done, the legacy of the 1980s. I'm glad Mark was spared that. In the 1980s, you could comfort yourself when you lost your family by saying, well, at least I've gained a community. I now feel like I have to reapply for my place in this new free gay community. And I'm sure my application will be rejected by those who don't know or who don't care that they're standing on the shoulders of those they now isolate and exploit. Community has been replaced by a more image-conscious world where the body is valued much more than the soul, and we're guaranteed the right to party on. I switched off to the political rhetoric of the haters long ago because I knew it by heart. My poor heart. To those that want to reassert their bigoted, privileged position at the cost of my human rights. To the attractive ones that are probably young enough to be my son, but I wasn't allowed to have any. To the couples that I celebrate and secretly envy because I wasn't allowed to commit when I was young and pretty like them. And I was once, I think. To the confident ones who don't value the battles hard won enough to respect the guy that loves them enough to want to be faithful. And to that ultimate contradiction, the open relationship. While the party rages on and youth is offered the only place at the top of the queue. I switched off to all of that in order to survive. Mark couldn't survive, but I did. I'm a survivor. And I look on now, somewhat enviously, at all that can be done today. The confidence, the acceptance, the love, and the respect. All things that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. Mark Ashton. My off switch was fused in the off position. But it wobbled that night when I saw Pride the movie. It shook when I saw Mark Ashton in all his youth and enthusiasm and beauty. I could have known him, could have loved him. We were the same age. But I was too inhibited by my Irishness to party like he partied. He kissed the generation that I wanted to kiss, and he loved the generation that I needed to love. And he got something that I didn't get. He blazed the trail, and so many were oblivious to the length of the journey and the confidence it took to take those first steps. Mark Ashton rattled my off switch, and it flickered on for just a moment. How dare he? But I think he knew how much it shocked. I won't be listened to by that generation that want to put more energy into forgetting us than they do into those final battles to ensure the right that we become more fully and emotionally human. From the grave, Mark Ashton and hundreds and thousands of young gay lives have been erased, and they're now forgotten. They are erased by prejudice, by criminalisation, and by AIDS. And they can only be validated if those that stood with them and loved them and were in awe of them keep their memories switched on. And not in grief or in absent anger, but in celebration. Our later victories are most certainly theirs. So now we must party. Celebrate. But is it a party in desperate celebration of a freedom still unattained? No longer controlled by the Catholic Church, but by the commercial? I don't begrudge that freedom one bit. But I do regret, no begrudge, the fact that Mark Ashton and all of those beautiful young gay people of the 1970s and 80s didn't live to see it. They are our war casualties. And the fact is that those of their generation that did live to see it aren't allowed to share in it equally, ostracised by attitudes similar in damage to those that excluded them when they were young. So, are our contemporary gay heroes who created this freedom now invisible within their own community? Or worse, are they now seen as ATMs to fund the drug habits of beautiful young gay men who offer mutual commercial exploitation, replacing self-respect with money for the next drug hit or the check for next month's rent because the wallet is empty after a weekend of hard partying? You have it. Freedom as we dreamt it has been offered to you on a plate. You didn't earn it because it took so long to get to this place. But you can and you must celebrate it. Just spare a thought for all those beautiful Mark Ashtons that didn't live to see the freedom that he and others fought so hard to achieve. See him in his contemporaries, now a little more wrinkled and a little heavier, but still hoping that somebody will come along and flick on that off switch. It has been a long journey and an even longer wait. And sometimes it's hard to find that switch in the darkness of invisibility and the isolation of age that ignores achievement. So switch on that light, illuminate that freedom for everybody to share, young and old. The last scene of Pride the movie, spoiler alert 2, was wonderful. When the Welsh miners arrived in solidarity in their buses with their banners to lead that 1985 Pride March in London, things changed. Mark Ashton and his friends did that. Those low-paid, exploited Welsh miners and the LGBT community, they saw the common bond in oppression, and together, they did that. Mark Ashton recognised that discrimination unites the oppressed. He built that bridge and for once, prejudice didn't stop people from crossing over. Young and older people did that. Young people can still do that. But the journey and the campaigns will make them older. I've waited longer for what we have now than most of you. And I still think it's up to others to decide who is included or excluded. Your birth cert will never be your only or your greatest achievement. It is simply a record of the day that your opportunity to do better began. Mark Ashton made the most of his opportunities. He and the generations that surrounded him, they smashed that off switch so that it could be turned on for everyone's sake. So here's to them. And here's to a good night out.